we hope, contributes to the monarchy.
The decision came without ceremony, without warning, and without any chance for discussion. Behind the closed doors of a private council chamber, King Charles signed an order that quietly reshaped Camilla's standing within the monarchy. Princess and stood beside him as the final document was sealed. Camilla's crown privileges were withdrawn. Her exclusive access was revoked, while Catherine was officially granted permission to enter the royal spaces from which the Queen Consort had just been removed. Before we go deeper into what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Music. Charles read the final paragraph twice. The royal directive, an official instruction carrying the monarch's authority, removed Camilla from restricted council chambers, ceremonial archives, private regalia files, and confidential planning meetings. His fingers remained around the pen after the ink had dried. This was not merely a procedural adjustment. It was a judgment against the woman who had stood beside him throughout his reign, and he understood that one signature could shake both the palace and his marriage. And did not celebrate. She closed the folder and reminded her brother that hesitation had already cost the family far too much. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally granted to the sovereign's eldest daughter, insisted on one final safeguard. Camilla's privileges could not be restored through pressure or emotional appeals. Any reversal would require approval from the king, William, and herself. Her voice remained steady, though sadness rested beneath every word. Duty had prevailed, but no one escaped the consequences. Catherine's name appeared on the following page. The Princess of Wales would now receive access to the chambers and records required to prepare for the monarchy's future, including ceremonial continuity, the process ensuring royal responsibilities pass smoothly into the next reign. Charles paused over her authorization. He trusted her patience, restraint, and loyalty to William, but granting her access while removing Camilla's would make the transition appear like a defeat before the public even knew. Camilla had not been informed. Her access credentials were already scheduled for cancellation, and the first locked door could reveal the truth before any conversation took place. Charles placed the signed documents into a cream envelope bearing the sovereign's seal, the official mark confirming that the instruction came directly from the crown, and pressed the seal into the wax and slid it toward the waiting secretary. As the secretary reached the door, Charles quietly asked, "Has Catherine been informed?" and held his gaze. Catherine was already on her way, and Camilla was walking toward the very same corridor. Before Catherine could fully understand what had just been entrusted to her, Camilla was about to discover exactly what had been taken away. This was never simply a struggle over keys, chambers, or ceremonial documents. For Charles, it became a judgment of trust. For Anne, it was the final act of safeguarding the institution. For Catherine, it was an honor weighed down by another woman's humiliation. And for Camilla, it confirmed a fear she had spent years trying to suppress, that acceptance within the monarchy could be granted publicly, yet quietly taken away with a single signature. Charles had defended Camilla for years, often at a personal cost he rarely admitted. He protected her place beside him, endured relentless criticism, and insisted that love and duty could exist together. Now, however, the king faced a truth he could no longer postpone. Loyalty to his wife had begun to conflict with responsibility to the crown, meaning the future of the monarchy could no longer be shaped by personal devotion alone. That realization cut even deeper because his feelings for her had never disappeared, and viewed the matter very differently. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the sovereign's eldest daughter, believed royal access was a responsibility earned through service, not a privilege gained through marriage. After Queen Elizabeth's passing, she made a private promise to Charles during a recorded family discussion. Ceremonial authority must never be mistaken for personal influence. She carried that promise with her now, even though honoring it meant hurting her own brother and leaving Camilla isolated. Catherine received the news inside a quiet sitting room, but she showed no sign of celebration. The Princess of Wales, the title held by the wife of the heir, understood that access to restricted briefings would prepare her for the next reign. Yet, after learning that Camilla had not been informed, she lowered her eyes and quietly asked whether the Queen Consort knew. The answer was no. Catherine responded that she would not step inside any protected chamber while another woman was being publicly humiliated. William had already examined the revised access framework, the official structure determining who could enter sensitive royal spaces. Although he was absent during the signing, the prince supported his wife's inclusion and reminded Charles that the transition must never appear to be an act of revenge. He trusted Catherine's restraint, but he also knew the palace had a way of turning one silent corridor into a lasting symbol of victory and defeat. Camilla walked toward that corridor carrying a folder for what she believed was a routine briefing. 2 security officers stood beside a door that was usually left unguarded. One avoided meeting her eyes. The other reached for the newly issued instruction card, and Camilla's steps slowed before anyone spoke. Then Catherine appeared at the far end of the hallway. Camilla extended her hand toward the locked door just as the future queen stopped in complete silence, forcing both women to face the same painful reality. The order had been signed behind closed doors, but its first consequence would unfold face to face beneath the watchful eyes of palace security. Every royal crisis has a single moment that history refuses to forget. In this case, it was neither a public speech nor a heated family dispute. It happened after a private ceremonial rehearsal when Camilla entered a restricted records chamber using an authorization intended for Charles. Once inside, she requested changes to Catherine's future access schedule without informing William, or the king. That one decision transformed years of quiet concern into a situation the palace could no longer ignore. Camilla had gradually taken on more ceremonial responsibilities whenever Charles became exhausted or unavailable. At first, her assistance seemed entirely practical. She reviewed official briefings, checked guest arrangements, and passed recommendations to palace staff. Yet ceremonial planning, the system responsible for organizing royal duties, formal events, and access to protected information, slowly gave the Queen Consort influence far beyond simple support. She began deciding who received documents, when they received them, and which names appeared within confidential schedules. And noticed the change before anyone else was willing to acknowledge it. The Princess Royal warned during a recorded family discussion that temporary assistance must never evolve into permanent control. Her concern was never driven by jealousy. She believed decisions affecting the next reign belonged directly to William and Catherine because their preparation would determine whether the monarchy remained stable after Charles. Camilla heard that warning, but she did not step away. 3 weeks before the decree, everything changed. Following an evening rehearsal, Camilla entered the Crown Continuity Records chamber using a clearance code issued to the king. The chamber was a protected archive containing plans for how royal duties, ceremonies, and authority would pass into the next reign. She instructed the senior custodian to delay Catherine's access to succession-related files and record the request as though it had come directly from the sovereign's household. The custodian froze. He knew Charles had issued no such instruction, yet the code carried the king's authority. His hands trembled as he entered the alteration into the record. Camilla then made another request. She wanted advance notice whenever the Princess of Wales requested access to private ceremonial inventories. She was no longer simply delaying Catherine. She was attempting to monitor her, and received the documented access log the following morning. She did not confront Camilla. Instead, she ordered the original record secured and the electronic file permanently sealed, ensuring that no future alteration could occur without leaving evidence. She then placed the documented proof before Charles. Charles stared at the authorization code for nearly a full minute. He recognized it immediately. That night, the king sat alone with the printed record, removed his glasses, folded the page once, and quietly whispered, "She used my name." By the following morning, he had summoned and without informing any aides. The hidden access request had exposed the breach, but only a direct confrontation could reveal why Camilla had risked everything to make it. When Camilla entered the private drawing room, she expected nothing more than a disagreement that could be eased with patience and familiarity. Instead, she found Charles standing beside the fireplace and seated near the window, and the access log placed openly on the table between them. No aides were present. No secretary remained to soften the conversation. The king pointed to the authorization code, looked directly at his wife, and asked the question that shattered every remaining defense. "Why did you use my authority?" Charles had cleared the room before she arrived. The access log, a documented record showing who entered a protected royal space and under whose authorization, rested between them like evidence that neither affection nor rank could erase, and remained because she had uncovered the breach, but also because her brother feared that facing Camilla alone might weaken his resolve. The king knew her voice, their history, and the years they had shared could make him hesitate. Camilla insisted she had acted only to prevent confusion. Catherine, she argued, was being introduced too quickly into restricted ceremonial matters, and a brief delay would protect the family from mistakes during a delicate transition. Her explanation was calm at first, almost gentle, but Charles did not move. He told her that concern did not give her permission to act in his name. His voice remained quiet, and that restraint made the accusation even more painful than anger. Camilla turned toward and, feeling cornered. The Queen Consort accused her of waiting for years to remove her from the center of royal life, and did not raise her voice. She replied that she had not created the access log, borrowed the sovereign's authority, or instructed staff to monitor Catherine. The Princess Royal then told her that fear might explain her actions, but it could never justify them. Camilla's composure finally broke. She admitted that Catherine's growing responsibilities had made her feel as though the monarchy was already preparing to move beyond her while she still stood beside Charles. Every new briefing, every restricted room, and every future-focused document had begun to feel like evidence that her place within the institution was slowly disappearing. Charles finally revealed the truth without softening it. The decree had already been signed. "You force me to choose between duty and deception," and looked away as tears filled Camilla's eyes. Without another word, Camilla walked out of the room, leaving her folder behind. Moments later, Charles opened it. Inside, he found a carefully prepared page filled with names. Camilla's confession had explained the fear behind her actions, but the abandoned folder revealed that the struggle for influence had never involved just one person. The folder Camilla left behind completely changed the meaning of the confrontation. Inside was not a confession, but a carefully organized list of private secretaries, ceremonial advisors, household officers, and access coordinators. Besides several names were handwritten notes identifying who supported Catherine's advancement, who opposed it, and who might be persuaded to delay future briefings. Charles examined every page in silence. Restricted access, the authority controlling who may enter sensitive rooms, receive protected documents, and attend confidential briefings, created influence long before any decision became public. Whoever received information first could shape ceremonial plans, influence recommendations, and quietly guide the monarchy's direction. The king felt deeply humiliated that members of his own household had become part of a quiet struggle between his wife and his daughter-in-law. He could not ignore how much damage his own silence had allowed, and required no written list to prove her authority. The Princess Royal had earned loyalty through decades of dedicated service, her lifelong bond with her brother, and a reputation for placing duty above personal alliances. She reminded Charles that Camilla had never possessed the authority to grant or deny succession access. The Queen Consort stood close to the sovereign, but closeness was never ownership. Final authority always remained with the monarch and the direct heirs preparing to carry the crown into the future. Charles summoned a longtime household coordinator whose name appeared inside the folder. The aide entered expecting an ordinary discussion, but his composure disappeared the moment the king placed the document before him. He admitted, through a documented private account, that he had been pressured to redirect Catherine's briefing requests and delay responses from her office. He confessed that he feared refusing Camilla would cost him his career. His voice trembled as he admitted that loyalty had gradually become obedience. The list revealed something even more troubling. One handwritten note described an unsuccessful effort to discover when William's private office intended to request permanent archive credentials for Catherine. Those credentials were formal permissions allowing continuous access to protected royal records. Someone had been monitoring the future king staff before the request had even been submitted. Charles removed the old access schedule from the folder and tore it cleanly through the center. He immediately ordered a completely new system requiring written explanations and multiple approvals for every future alteration. Catherine learned the truth during a private conversation with William. Pain crossed her face, but she refused to demand punishment. She quietly told the prince that the monarchy would never heal if her advancement became the public destruction of Camilla. Her restraint changed Charles's thinking. But before he could respond, Camilla approached the Crown Council suite carrying credentials that had already been cancelled. The true test of the decree would not come from the paper Charles had signed. It would come from the locked door Camilla still believed would open for her. Camilla placed her access card against the reader exactly as she had done countless times before. The light flashed red. She tried again, more slowly this time, then turned toward the security officer standing beside the Crown Council entrance. He did not reach for the door. Instead, he quietly informed her that her credentials had been cancelled by direct order of the king. In that single moment, the decree stopped being words on paper and became reality. Camilla remained completely still as the officer explained that the palace security system had been updated only hours earlier. The Crown Council suite, the protected area where senior royals receive confidential advice and prepare major decisions, was now closed to her. The ceremonial archives and restricted planning offices were also no longer accessible. The change carried far greater meaning than a locked door. Access to those rooms meant access to information, influence, and the future direction of the monarchy. Without it, the Queen Consort would continue standing beside Charles in public, while remaining outside the rooms where the most important decisions were quietly shaped. At the far end of the corridor, Catherine held a newly issued access card. Her credentials were not symbolic. They granted entry to future reign briefings, protected ceremonial inventories, and continuity planning sessions, the meetings designed to prepare royal responsibilities for the next monarch. Catherine understood the responsibility she had been given. She also understood exactly how the timing appeared. Her gain had arrived at the precise moment of Camilla's loss. Camilla made one final request. She asked to enter only once so she could collect her personal notes. The officer respectfully lowered his gaze before explaining that Princess and had already instructed staff to catalogue every personal item and return them under official supervision. Only a handful of palace employees witnessed the exchange. Yet humiliation spread through the silence. Charles watched everything from the opposite end of the corridor. The king took one step toward his wife, then stopped. Comforting her in front of the staff would weaken the order he had personally approved. Walking away, however, made him appear colder than he truly felt. Camilla noticed his hesitation. That brief pause hurt more than the flashing red light. Catherine refused to walk past her. She remained exactly where she was, holding the new access card without moving toward the entrance. The future queen would not allow one woman's exclusion to become another woman's victory. At last, Camilla removed the cancelled card from its ribbon and quietly placed it into the officer's hand. Even after he accepted it, her hand remained extended for a moment, as though part of her still expected him to give it back. When she finally turned away, Catherine quietly asked that her own first entry into the restricted chamber be postponed until the following morning. Charles learned of her decision within minutes. The locked door had separated their royal positions. But Charles now believed that only an honest conversation, free from protocol and titles, could prevent that separation from becoming permanent hatred. There were no private secretaries in the room. No ceremonial folders rested on the table. No security officers stood close enough to overhear a single word. Catherine arrived first and remained beside the window instead of taking the chair traditionally reserved for the senior royal. Camilla entered moments later, quietly closed the door behind her, and asked whether the meeting had been arranged by Charles. Catherine gently shook her head. "No," she replied. "I asked to meet you because I cannot accept what you lost without understanding why you feared me." Charles had offered them the room but deliberately chose not to guide the conversation, and also stayed away, understanding that institutional authority, the formal power carried by royal office and official decisions, could punish a breach but could never heal the hurt beneath it. Catherine had no intention of reopening the decree. Her goal was to prevent this transfer of access from becoming the first battle of William's future reign. Camilla answered slowly. Every mention of continuity, preparation, and the next generation had gradually begun to sound like a quiet reminder that her importance was fading. Continuity planning meant preparing royal responsibilities for the next monarch, but to the Queen Consort it felt deeply personal. She feared becoming nothing more than a ceremonial figure who still stood beside Charles in public, while losing every meaningful voice within the family she had fought so hard to join. Catherine did not hide her own pain. She admitted that being monitored and delayed had left her feeling distrusted before she had even accepted her responsibilities. The Princess of Wales explained that preparing for the future had never been intended to erase the present. Yet she also made one thing clear. Using Charles's authorization had crossed a boundary no insecurity could justify. Camilla finally admitted the truth. She had deliberately used the King's Code because she knew the request would likely be rejected if it carried only her own authority. That confession removed the final barrier between them. Catherine quietly set a boundary of her own. She would never ask Charles to reverse the decree, and she would never pretend the betrayal had not happened. But she also promised that Camilla would not be erased from family life simply because she no longer controlled crown access. Camilla placed the cancelled ribbon on the table and gently pushed it toward Catherine. Catherine did not touch it. "That belonged to your position," she said. "I am not here to take away your dignity." Camilla's anger quietly gave way to grief. She thanked Catherine for waiting in the corridor instead of walking through the door in front of her. That simple act, she admitted, had meant more than any public statement ever could. When Catherine left the room, she went directly to Charles. She had accepted the responsibility placed upon her. but she had refused to let compassion disappear. Her next words would determine how the world understood Camilla's downfall. By sunrise, news of the palace decision had spread far beyond its walls. Television crews gathered outside Buckingham Palace while newspaper vans arrived carrying front pages dominated by a single unforgettable image: Catherine walking toward a restricted entrance as Camilla's empty access ribbon rested in the hand of a security officer. The largest headline declared, "Crown door closes on Camilla. Catherine steps forward." Inside the palace, however, Catherine was determined to ensure that the announcement would not become an invitation to celebrate another woman's humiliation. She carefully read the draft statement twice before placing it back on the table. The continuity review, the formal process used to prepare royal responsibilities and protected duties for the next reign, confirmed that ceremonial access had been reassigned to her. The wording made it unmistakably clear that the decision belonged to Charles and the Crown, not to any request she had ever made. Senior courtiers welcomed the decree as a restoration of proper order, while palace staff received written instructions making it clear that personal relationships could never again override official access procedures. Outside the palace gates, public opinion quickly divided. Many praised the Princess of Wales as the steady figure preparing to safeguard the monarchy's future. Others viewed Camilla's removal as an unnecessarily harsh dismissal after years of standing beside the king. The debate intensified because the issue was never simply about an access card. It separated marriage from authority and forced the public to decide whether standing beside a monarch should automatically guarantee lasting influence. Charles listened as crowds outside began chanting Catherine's name. The king slowly walked toward the window, stood silently for several moments, then closed the curtain. Every cheer for the future queen sounded like another judgment against his wife, and he knew Camilla would hear those same voices from another room. Catherine requested that one additional sentence be added to the official statement. The new line would acknowledge Camilla's years of public service and confirm her continuing place beside Charles. Several advisers argued that showing compassion might weaken the announcement, and disagreed. During a recorded communications meeting, the Princess Royal insisted that accountability must remain clear, but punishment should never become public spectacle. Charles approved the change. Near the Victoria Memorial, one woman held up two photographs during a live television broadcast. One showed Camilla standing beside the king. The other showed Catherine beside William. She looked into the camera and quietly said, "One represents the king's life, and the other represents the future of the crown." The palace has finally accepted that those are not the same thing. Camilla heard those words alone. She switched off the television before the commentators began praising Catherine's rise, but her expression softened when she learned who had insisted on recognizing her years of service in the official statement. Soon afterward, Charles summoned Camilla, Catherine, and William. The world had already chosen its symbols. Now the family had to decide whether protecting the monarchy would require destroying the family itself. The final meeting did not restore what had been taken away, nor did it pretend the betrayal had never happened. Charles entered carrying the signed decree, and brought the sealed access records. Catherine arrived alongside William. Camilla entered alone and quietly took the chair farthest from the king. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then Charles placed both hands on the table and declared that the authority of the crown would remain protected, but the family would not be allowed to turn accountability into permanent exile. He confirmed that the decree would remain unchanged. Camilla's restricted crown privileges would not be restored. Catherine would continue holding full access to continuity planning, ceremonial archives, and protected council briefings. Continuity planning meant preparing royal responsibilities for the next reign, making the decision far greater than a simple family disagreement. It determined who would carry knowledge, responsibility, and trust into the future of the monarchy, and would supervise the transition for a limited period. The Princess Royal would guide Catherine through the system, but she would never become another private center of influence. Every future change would require written justification and shared approval. The lesson was unmistakable. No personal relationship, regardless of its closeness, would ever again control access to the crown. Charles then turned toward Camilla. The king told his wife that his love for her had never disappeared, but love could not erase the misuse of his authority. Their marriage would remain personal. The crown would remain institutional. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then she admitted before the entire family that fear had driven her to protect a position that had never truly belonged to her through secrecy. She did not ask for her access card to be returned. Catherine refused to accept any sense of victory. The Princess of Wales explained that she would enter the restricted chambers as a servant of the monarchy, not as the winner of a family conflict. She also requested that no portraits, official schedules, or public ceremonies be changed simply to make Camilla's loss more visible, and delivered the final conclusion. Trust, she said, could never be repaired through titles or speeches. It could only be rebuilt through actions. With those words, she closed the sealed records folder, making it clear that the investigation had ended and no additional punishment would follow. Charles gently slid Camilla's cancelled ribbon across the table. It no longer unlocked any royal door, but it still belonged to her. Camilla quietly folded the ribbon once before placing it inside her handbag. Later that day, William accompanied Catherine to the entrance of the Crown Council. She held up her newly issued access card, paused for a brief moment, and looked back at him. William smiled softly. "Walk through that door for what lies ahead," he said, "not for what has been left behind." Catherine nodded and stepped forward. The heavy door closed quietly behind her. It was never an act of revenge against Camilla. Instead, it became the final reminder that the monarchy's future would be protected through trust, accountability, and duty rather than personal influence. For Charles, the decision carried a lasting cost. For Camilla, it marked the painful end of a chapter she had fought desperately to preserve. For Anne, it proved that responsibility to the crown must always stand above personal emotion. And for Catherine, it became the beginning of a new role defined not by victory, but by service. The family had endured one of its most difficult moments. Trust had been broken. Relationships had been tested. Yet the institution moved forward with clearer boundaries than ever before. No title could replace integrity. No position could outweigh responsibility. And no personal bond would again be allowed to stand above the interests of the crown. Everyone left the room understanding that some decisions change far more than official records. They reshape the people required to live with them. The future of the monarchy would continue under a different structure, one built upon transparency, shared responsibility, and carefully earned trust. This time, every member of the royal family understood exactly where they stood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.